Well, good morning. Last week, we started talking about the book of Romans, and and when we talked about how the past is like a foreign country. They do things differently. And whenever you study any of the New Testament documents, you got to remember that it is written in the past to real people, and some of the, just even what it took to get a message out there, to get a letter of any kind of, any kind of longer document out there took a lot. We talked about it last week, what it took to compose a letter, just to even find the things to write it on, and what it took to deliver it, and that it was meant to be read, and all of that was steeped in first century ancient Near East culture. And if you haven't seen it, I really encourage you to go and watch last week's message, part 1, and see about how different it is to write a letter now versus 2,000 years ago. And so we have to remember when we study this letter to the Romans, it was a real letter written by a real person to other real people in a real culture that is not like ours, who were about to hear this letter being read. And they weren't about to read it. They were really about to hear it being read to them. And many of them, read for the first time. And it was written by a guy they had never met. They had heard of him, but they had never met him. And imagine Paul's task of getting together, writing this letter, right, and not certain what they knew. He was not certain what these Roman Christians, these Christians who live in Rome, he didn't know what they knew. I mean, he knew that they were mostly Gentile, that the Jewish people had all been kicked out of Rome, and they had just only been allowed back in for a couple of years, and so they were making their way back in. So the church was mostly Gentile Christians. That means non-Jewish. And so he knew that since it was mostly Gentile, mostly non-Jewish Christians, that they didn't know, they weren't experts in the Old Testament like the Jewish Christians probably were. Or at least even if they weren't experts in the Old Testament, what Paul calls the Scriptures in the first chapter of Romans, they at least knew them better than the Gentiles who didn't grow up around them. He knew that they probably knew the teachings of Jesus and the message of Jesus, but maybe not that well. He didn't know exactly all the stuff they knew about it. He didn't know what these Roman Gentile Christians knew about the gospel or salvation. And it was hard to tell, because we have a pretty good idea that the letter to Romans was written about 57 or 58 AD. And it took the letter a while to get there, and that there's good evidence that by 57 or 58 AD, no gospel is complete in the form that you know it today. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and definitely not John. None of these are complete in how we know them today. And so they probably have never had a gospel read to them. And moreover, there were not other epistles or letters in the New Testament that were written by 57, 58. We are almost certain that the letter, the book of James was written, the letter that Jesus' half-brother that wrote, James, that it was probably written, but that was written to Jewish people, to the Jews that in the diaspora, right, that were dispersed, that were kicked out of whenever things started going south. And we know Galatians. We're pretty certain the letter to the Galatians that Paul wrote, and 1st and 2nd Thessalonians were probably all written, but Paul doesn't know if they've read them before, if they've heard them. I mean, the Galatia was 1,000 miles away. In the other, 500 miles in the opposite direction of where he was. to get to Rome. Thessalonica was 600 miles away from Rome, and you had to cross the Adriatic Sea. If you walk there, you have to cross the sea and walk 600 miles. And so he's not sure. Paul can't be certain that they have heard, read aloud, any of the documents that we know of as the New Testament. Well, he's certain that they hadn't heard most of them. But even the ones that were written, he can't be sure that they have heard them. And so put yourself in this situation. That's what you got to try to do whenever you read the New Testament. You try to put yourself in this situation. That maybe you're in, maybe you're one of these mostly Gentile churches. And it's really a collection of churches. It wasn't a singular church in Rome. And Paul is writing a letter to you and your brothers and sisters in Jesus, this very new thing. And in this letter, he's writing to you, he's trying to accomplish a couple of things. One is he's trying to just make sure that you and the rest of your church and the collection of churches understand the gospel and Jesus and God and the church and salvation and those type of things. And so he's trying to make sure that we're all on the same page. That we're all on the same page. He's also, and really by making sure that we're on the same page, him writing this letter to you as a church member and really a family member of a gathering, of an assembly, that you understand, and writing so that you understand, he's going to gain and establish rapport with you and your brothers and sisters and the rest of the collection of churches in Rome. And eventually he's going to show up and he's going to try to get you to support financially and other ways his mission to go to Spain and plant more churches along the way to support his ministry. And so to do this, right, to do all of this, he writes a singular letter, what we know of as the book or the letter to the Roman church. Now, he's going to employ a communication tool that's very common to these Roman Gentiles. It would have been very common in his day, a certain style of message. It would be very common, and even more than that, it would be very important to Roman people. See, Rome was a little bit, they thought of themselves pretty highly. Right? It's like, hey, in New Mexico, if you're from Albuquerque, that's the big city. Everywhere else is just, kind of bumpkin. Right? It can be like that sometimes. Or, New York, that's the center of culture, right? That's the center of good things. Oh, Los Angeles, that's the epicenter of, beautiful people and great weather and, whatever it is. Well, Rome really cared about communication. They called it rhetoric. And Paul's going to employ a style that not only would be meaningful to them, but would be important to them as well. And so he's going to start he's already given his introduction, and now he's going to start by establishing some goodwill. Read with me, if you would, in Romans 1, 8 through 15. First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith is proclaimed in all of the world. For God is my witness, whom I serve with my spirit in the gospel of his Son, so that without ceasing I mention you always in my prayers, asking that somehow by God's will I may now at last succeed in coming to you. For I long to see you, that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to strengthen you. That is, that we may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith, both yours and mine. I do not want you to be unaware, brothers, that I have intended to come to you, but have thus far been prevented, in order that I may reap some harvest among you, as well as among the rest of the Gentiles. I am under obligation both to Greeks and to barbarians, both to the wise and the foolish. So I am eager to preach the gospel to you also who are in Rome. You see, verse 8, he goes to butter them up. He says, I thank God through Christ for all of you, because everybody's heard about you and how great you are. Your faith is proclaimed all around the world, right? He's off to a really good start. And then he tells them, hey, listen, I am consistently and constantly thinking and praying for you in verse 9 and 10. And this isn't, part of this is buttering him up, but it's not lying. He says, I call on God to witness. I call on God to witness that I pray for you, that I without ceasing, that I mention you in my prayers. And I pray something for you. I pray that we can eventually and finally come together and meet. And then he gives his intention on seeing them. He says, I ask that God would allow me to come see you. In verse 13, that I have intended often to come see you, but have been prevented. And sometimes that's because he's been in jail. Or because he's taken a collection to the Jerusalem church that is really suffering, or for various other reasons. He said, I've tried and I've wanted to, I've even asked God, and I haven't done it yet. But let me tell you, I pray for you often. I pray for you often. And then he talks about how seeing them. He says, so when I finally come, when God finally allows us to see one another, it will result in me blessing you and you blessing me, right? That whenever we finally get together as a family in Jesus, who we've never met, but we are family, when we finally meet, it will result in a mutual blessing. That I will receive blessing from you, and you will receive blessing from me. And how the result of that, how me blessing you and you blessing me, right? How us blessing one another would also result in the kingdom expanding. In verse 13, right? In order that I might reap some harvest among you as well as among the rest of the Gentiles. He says, I'm going to bless you and you're going to bless me, and we're going to build one another up, and that's going to mean that the kingdom is going to increase. And then he finally says, listen, because my mission, I am under obligation, not because they've done something that for him that he owes them back. He says, but I am under obligation, meaning God has obliged him. He says, I am under obligation to everyone. My ministry is all inclusive, to dumb people, to smart people, to Greeks and barbarians, right? So he's trying to butter them up, right? Greeks and barbarians, wise and foolish. All the wise Greeks, right? All the great Roman people. He says, but my ministry is to everybody, dumb and smart, honorable, dishonorable, elite, rednecks, Yankees, hillbillies, like everybody. Everybody. He said, that's who it's for. And so he establishes this rapport. He establishes this rapport because he's going to explain something to them. Paul is going to move on. He's going to move on to his thesis statement. Remember ninth grade English? Remember ninth grade English? You had to write your paper, and then you had to put your first paragraph, the last sentence, the fifth sentence of your paragraph had to contain your thesis statement. What the whole paper was about. You had to say it within 5 sentences. Right? That was Miss Hill. Thanks, Mrs. Hill. So Paul is moving on to his thesis statement. He is done with the niceties. He has established a rapport, and now he's moving on to the thesis statement, the linchpin, the most important statement in the whole letter, the statement upon which everything else in this letter will be built. And it's 2 verses, verse 16 and verse 17. Paul says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew and also to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith, as it is written, the righteous shall live by faith." I'm going to read it again. It's that important. "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith, as it is written, the righteous shall live by faith." You see, Paul is using this very common form, this very common format. And they know to perk up. They know to listen intently. They know that this is the most important part. They know that this thesis statement, they know that this linchpin, that this is the statement that Paul will be defending, explaining, arguing for the rest of the letter until he gets to chapter 16, and then he turns back on some formalities and some niceties. And so he is saying in this, don't miss this. Don't miss this. And he starts off this statement saying, I am so proud of the gospel. I am so proud of it, right? I am not ashamed of the gospel. Now, you and I might go, well, why would you be ashamed of the gospel? Well, I mean, if you think about it, in an honor-shame culture, honor good, shame bad. You do things that are honorable. You avoid things that will cause you shame, and especially public shame. There were few things more shameful than a dead Jewish carpenter. And not just dying of natural causes, but dying on a cross, the most shameful of death. And if you die on a cross, then it took a considerable amount to get you there, meaning that you probably did some really, really shameful things to earn that. Because no one died on a cross by accident. No one who was good died on a cross. That was reserved for the most shameful of people, the most blatant criminals. But Paul says, as outwardly shameful as it might seem, as culturally shameful as it might seem, that the gospel may seem, a crucified Jewish manual laborer, I'm not ashamed of it. In fact, I'm proud of the gospel. Because the gospel demonstrates the power of God to save anyone and everyone who simply believes. He says first to the Jew, and then to the Gentile, also to the Greek. And what he is saying is, listen, this message originated with Jews, but it is not simply to the Jewish people. It is to everyone. It is the good news, full stop. It's not the good news to Jewish people. It's not the good news to simply Roman people only. It's not the good news to the cultured. It's not the good news to people that speak Greek. It's not just good news to certain types of people or certain places where they live. It is the good news for all time, for everyone, and all it takes is belief. You see, Paul says, I am proud of that. I am proud of that good news. I am proud that it is that the power of God is demonstrated in the gospel. Right? The gospel demonstrates this power of God, and it is an awesome, incredible power, a power like maybe we've never seen. You see, in these days, tribalism. I feel like America, in a lot of ways, is going back to tribalism. You are described by your tribe. You are described by who you affiliate with. You are described by, you are identified in a lot of ways, but the least important is your individual identity. And so there were gods of certain places. And so if you lived in this city or that city, or if you were under this king or that king, your God would do good things for you. But outside of that, right? Or if you were a certain profession, you had certain, you had a god of the blacksmiths and a god of the sailors, and that really was just yours. And that God, might have demonstrated power, but that God's realm was contained in that place, that tribe, that profession. And Paul says, listen, I am proud of the gospel because it shows this all-encompassing power of God. It demonstrates the all-encompassing power of God to save anybody, regardless of, what if they can't work? What if they weren't born in that spot? What if they weren't born of that family or that tribe? What if they're not in that tribe? Are they outside of God's power to save? And Paul says, no, and I'm proud of that. And he goes on in verse 17, it says, for in it, talking about the gospel that he is very proud of, for in the gospel, for in it the righteousness of God is revealed. The righteousness of God is revealed. God's character is revealed in the gospel, and that He is a righteous God. God's righteous character is revealed in the demonstration of power of this gospel, of this not just ability, but willingness to save anybody. And to save anybody simply on belief, not doing the right things. You don't sacrifice the right animal, pray the right prayer. That simply for belief, anyone can receive this salvation of this powerful God from this righteous God. And so what Paul here is doing is he's redefining honor in the light of Jesus. Right? And so he's talking to a group of people who live in an honor-shame culture, and they know exactly how dishonorable, how shameful the gospel appears. And Paul says, no, I'm redefining honor, not according to man's terminology. See, because to do that, to maintain honor in the first century world and even today, to maintain honor, you kind of had to agree with that some people were better than others. Some people had more value than other people. Some people were just intrinsically worth more than other people. Right? That was like, and if you went against that, that was a shameful thing. If you talk to people of lower class, if you maintain friendships with people in a different social strata, the way you acted, the way you dressed, all portrayed honor and shame depending on what it was. For a Greek, a Roman citizen, it might be more honorable to take your baby and leave it out in the forest to die if it had some kind of disability, or if it wasn't wanted, or you weren't sure you could feed it. That was the honorable thing to do. Right? Or you might have to hate some group of people. Exclude them from God. Oh, they can't afford the sacrifice. They can't afford the cost of what it means to enter into the temple, and exclude them from God. And Paul is saying, I'm going to redefine honor. And I'm going to redefine shame. Right? I am not ashamed of the gospel, because a crucified Jewish carpenter demonstrated that there is power, in God to do all things to save all people. And in doing so, he demonstrated the righteousness of that God. He redefined honor. Now, he's doing something very similar that Jesus did. Jesus also redefined honor in terms of who God is. Jesus said things like, you've heard it said, love your neighbor, but hate your enemy. But I tell you this, love your enemy. Pray for those who persecute. Right? He says, you've heard it said that this is the right thing to do, the honorable thing to do. But I'm telling you that's wrong, and that's wrong according to how God is. If you look at the character of God, that will show you, I can show you from the character of God that the way that you're doing that is wrong, even though it may be common. It may be common knowledge, common sense. Do nice things for people who are nice to you. Do bad things, or don't do anything for people who are mean to you. That's common sense. And Jesus says, no, I'm redefining what common sense is. I'm redefining what shame is and what honor is. So see, Paul says, I am not ashamed of the gospel, because in it demonstrates the power of God. That he is able to. And he is not only able to save all people, it shows that he's powerful enough to save all people on simple belief. But it says something more about God. It talks about his character, and that his main character is righteousness. And it's demonstrated by that from faith through faith, right? And the only way that you see God's character, his righteous character, is through faith. The only way that that's really demonstrated to you, the only way that's demonstrated effectively, the only way that you'll actually believe it, demonstrated in a way that you'll believe it, is through faith. From faith. Some of your versions might read, for the righteousness of God is revealed, for the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith. Or from faith for faith. Right? That faith is the main ingredient to see the righteousness of God, because without it, you will not be able to see it. You won't be able to see the righteousness of the faithful one unless you have faith. And then he quotes the Old Testament prophet Habakkuk. For the righteous will live by faith. The righteous, if you want a little different translation that's a little more close to how it's written in the Greek, the righteous by faith, they will live. The righteous by faith will live. He says that's the linchpin. You see, over the next 14 chapters, there are going to be 12 arguments. 12 arguments supporting the fact that the gospel is no reason for shame, because it demonstrates the power of God, who's willing to save all who believe, and that if you believe, you will see the righteousness of God in it. And this is the linchpin of the whole book, of the whole letter. This is where all the hearers would perk their ears up and go, okay, this is really important. And so I would really encourage you as well. I would really encourage you as well to listen to this, read this, and maybe even listen to the whole letter to the book of Romans. You know, it takes 1 hour. It takes 1 hour to listen from Romans 1:1 to the end of chapter 16. It takes 1 hour to listen to it. And do like what, so if you want to put yourself in the shoes, if you want to put yourself in the shoes of these church members in Rome, take some time this week and listen to the whole thing from start to finish, understanding that verse 16 and 17, for I am not ashamed of the gospel. For it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew, then to the Greek. For in it, the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith. For as it is written, the righteous by faith will live. Knowing that is the most important piece, that's the bedrock upon which every other argument will be built upon. And so what do you do with this, right? So that would be my one-to-one application. Right? How do you apply this? Listen to the whole book from that point of view. Listen to this whole letter, the whole letter of Romans. You can go to the Grace Church app. You can go to Bible down at the bottom, go to Romans 1, and you can just hit play. If you have a speaker connected to your phone or you're in your car, you can just cast it to that. You can put it onto that and just listen it's 1 hour. It's 1 hour of your day. Don't watch a TV show or two, right? And listen to the whole book of Romans from start to finish. And hear what those first century Christians heard. Secondly, I'm going to encourage you that this is a journey, right? That since this is the foundation, sometimes have you ever walked around on a foundation of a house where there's no walls built, there's nothing else? And sometimes it can look kind of bleak, it can look kind of barren, and sometimes it can look kind of small. It's kind of weird how that happens. You walk around on a foundation of even a big house, you go, man, it's not very much room. And then as the wall's starting to get built, you go, wow, this house is big. Something about it changes your perspective. Well, the same way the journey of faith is, right? The more of God's righteousness that is revealed to you by faith, the more your faith will grow. Right? And that is how you will live. So when you read the Bible, when you pray, when you do acts of service, of kindness, when you give, when you love, right, when you do those things and when you do them in faith, God's righteousness is revealed. And it will be revealed more and more to you. And as your faith, right, it will grow your faith. And as your faith grows, more of God's righteousness will be revealed to the point where you will be like Paul, right? Because Paul has said in other places, follow me as I follow Christ. Do the things that I do because I am following after Jesus. And so whenever you are looking at God's righteousness through the lens of faith, right, you are going to think and pray the way Paul did. Think about your prayers. Are your prayers all focused on you and your family? Bless me, bless me, bless me. Gimme, gimme, gimme. Or are your prayers outward focused, right? Can you say, as God is my witness, I pray for you all the time to people that are outside of your immediate family, to people that are in the community, to people that you've never met, to people that you don't know, who you've only heard about. Like Paul's raising his hand and saying, ask God, He's my witness. I pray for you all the time. Whenever you get together with other believers, what's the result? Is it receiving and giving blessing? Or is it griping? Is it consternation? Is it giving and receiving blessing? Because that's what Paul said. Whenever we meet, this is what it's going to, going to church, this is what it's going to mean. When I see you at church, at the gathering, when I see you, when I'm finally with you, it's going to mean this. It's going to mean that I bless you and I'm going to receive blessing from you. Is that what it's like whenever you get together with other believers? And because of that, because you get together with other believers, does it result in the kingdom expanding whenever you guys you give and receive blessing and you go out encouraged and you share the gospel? Does it do that? Because as more of God's righteousness is revealed, it is not just for you to know, it is not just for you to store up in your heart and go, oh, isn't that good, isn't that special? Because the more of God's righteousness that is revealed to you through faith, your faith will grow. And as your faith will grow, you will take on these qualities. You will pray for people that you don't know well. You will pray for people that you've never met. You will pray for them consistently. And you'll be able to raise your hand and go, God is my witness. I pray for you a lot. And when you get together with other Christians, it will be mutual benefit of giving and receiving blessing. And whenever you do that, then it will be the kingdom expanding as you share the gospel. For I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. Right? I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God unto salvation for all who believes. That's it. That's the foundation. Let's pray. Father, we thank you that the gospel of your Son, Jesus Christ, demonstrates your power. And maybe more importantly, demonstrates your righteousness. So, Father, help us to see it through the lens of faith. Father, help us to be conformed, be transformed into the image of your Son, Jesus, as your righteousness is revealed through faith and by faith. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Love you guys. We'll see you next week.